Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mark. So, as Mark mentioned, first 10, 15, 20 minutes, I want to spend on explaining what actually compatibility zones and business networks are. And please stop me at any point of time if you feel that you haven't gotten something or something is missing, or if you've got any questions, because the further explanation of the business network membership service will be based on the full understanding of the compatibility zone and business network concepts. Right, Mark, next slide, please.
I'm trying to...
Big latency. Is it sharing your screen?
It should be. It's very low latency. Okay.
It was being shared earlier, but now I think it's taken off. Yeah, I see the slides now. Thank you.
Do you see is everyone seeing the agenda slide?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. So the topics I would like to talk you through today. So first of all, overview of the business networks and business compatibility zones. Then they review the business network membership service design approach, verify that the concept to use the Corda is correct from the customer perspective, verify that the proposed model is viable, and agree, obviously, on the key points of design. Next slide, please.
To come down again.
Okay, so first of all, what is compatibility zone? So we introduced the concept of the compatibility zones in Corda version 3. So that's the official definition. So basically, compatibility zone is a global collection of Corda nodes configured with common networking and using shared identity framework that are able to transact because of sharing the same common standards. So in my own words, what this actually means. So the compatibility zone defines the set of minimal technical identity and networking requirements for the nodes within this zone to be able to talk to each other. It's a very important thing that I'm not talking about the transacting here. I'm talking just about the ability to establish the connection between each other and to send messages to each other without the transacting. So what this actually means. So some of you probably know that with Corda version 3, we introduced, for example, the viability, which means that after version 3, when you upgrade the platform to a newer version, then it will just work out of the box, and applications on the Corda version 3 will be able to talk to the applications of Corda version 4. So this works because we introduced like a common talking language, say serialization standards. So this also means that in production compatibility zone, every node would have to run at least Corda version 3 in order to be able to talk to each other. Otherwise, Corda version 2 wouldn't be compatible with the Corda version 3 because they are not talking the same language. This is an example of one of the parameters which can be set at the compatibility zone. For example, a minimum platform version. So another example would be, for example, the identity. So the nodes to be able to talk to each other and understand, to trust each other, they have to share the same identity root, which is, as you know, the service called Domain, which issues the node certificate in Corda. So the certificate authorities also lives on the compatibility zone level, and that's defines the identity, which has to be shared with between all the nodes. So for these two examples, they're good examples of the minimal technical standards without even touching the ability for the nodes to transact with each other, just about the technical compatibility of the nodes. Next slide, please. So to be able to, iterate through it, so to be able to transact on the network, nodes choose, the first thing, have a single well-defined identity, which is these identities are issued by the daemon. The nodes needs to be discoverable by other participants, so otherwise nodes just wouldn't be able to find each other on the network. And the nodes should become compliant with a set of minimal technical standards, such as I mentioned, the minimal platform version, or for example, you could specify like maximum message size or maximum chain length size to be able to successfully transact on the network. But these kind of parameters are enforced by the compatibility zone. They are not related to any transaction-related stuff. They're just about the nodes being able to talk to each other. So, but the actual how the nodes actually transact is defined on the business network level, and that's the topic which we'll be talking covering next. So just make sure, please ask any questions if you feel that you didn't fully get the concept of the compatibility zone.
Hi, this is Jesse from Astra. I have a quick question. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you please share what are your vision in terms of who owns and operates this compatibility zone as in the network services? Do you envision all three to be the operator for all of them, or do you expect some network to be somewhat independent? Running their own compatibility zone themselves.
I can answer that.
I was looking at James. So I'll answer that.
Oh, fantastic. Go ahead, James.
Oh, you're on, Richard. You can go.
I am. I was going to point at James. Is James in the room? Because he's Mr. Good.
No, he's not.
We have Mike, but not James.
Yeah, so I can talk about it if you like. So the vision is there's one global network. That's the goal, I should say, rather than the vision. For obvious reasons, because then everyone can talk to everyone else, and all apps would interoperate, and that's a very nice vision, isn't it? So, in terms of who operates this, there isn't actually very much to operate, but there's the ID verification and signing of certificates and things. Who does that? We are. Well, so I was talking about that with James this morning. There's a variety of very advanced proposals around governance and things there, which are final stages of being agreed on. And I think because we are so very close, I think we'll be able to start talking about what we plan to do there pretty soon. It's complicated because, of course, people don't want one entity to own it or control it, because that would be less decentralized. Zone operators can't do very much. Their power is pretty limited by the design of the software, but what little power is left, can be subjected to a governance framework. So that's the vision. In practice, of course, we accept that people will want to run their own networks too, and the software does support that, of course. You can configure it to connect to different compatibility zones, but then you're not compatible with nodes in other zones. So that's a strategic decision for people who operate nodes.
Sorry, I didn't get that right. So you're saying that we can operate our own network services, so anybody can create their own compatibility zone, but that would not work in the global network? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, almost by definition, if you create your own, then it's different to the global network in some way, and that difference would be an incompatibility. It's not an artificial notion of incompatibility. It's more like if you don't agree on these things, then you're going to get like failures at runtime because the nodes won't recognize each other's notaries, or you won't accept the other side's certificate as a proof of identity, things like that. So yeah, the documentation website has the details on the things you need to do if you want to run your own compatibility zone. But then you would be incompatible indeed.
Gotcha.
Maybe just to re-emphasize that for everybody else, because I think people get confused about this. Compatibility zone is not is not some restriction that we're trying to add, or some arbitrary definition. It's, as Mike says, it's our attempt to say what is the absolute minimal set of things two nodes need to agree on in order, in principle, to be able to transact. And then, as Ivan's taken us through it, you have to trust ultimately the same root of identity, have to have the same network parameters. If you disagree on the largest allowable message size, then one of you is going to reject a transaction that the other accepts. And you have to trust the same sets of notary pools for technical reasons we can get onto later. So that's kind of the result of a technical analysis that says, you know, what is the minimal set of things people have to agree on, and that defines a compatibility. That's a compatibility zone. It's a Corda network, a network of nodes that can talk to each other. And then within that, and this is the purpose of this design review board, as I was going to take us through, is given that context, how can we enable multiple different for-profit, commercial, non-profit, you know, charitable, third sector, whatever it is, networks of networks of participants running different applications to coexist and interoperate on that global compatible network. So within this technical context, how do we allow multiple different applications and business networks to operate? That's the I guess the context for this DRB.
So hi Richard, can you hear me? It's Buzz.
Yep.
Yeah, hi Buzz. Yeah.
That's great. Hi. So, I mean, there's quite a lot already in the network map that one could argue whether it's actually required or not. So one of the concerns that we've had is around the whitelist and the way that sort of makes the entire process of upgrade quite a kind of a lockstep operation that needs to have essentially kind of signal to every node out there that there is this new set of contracts that need to be approved, if you like. And I think that we were wondering if we have a design proposal, a discussion that we'd like to have around the idea of a set of federated set of network maps, whereby we still have the same sort of concerns and requirements around, say, the underlying sort of the parameters that are required for the comms to occur. But then there's the ability to judiciously share nodes from one network to another set of networks, and most importantly, to hide certain nodes as well. So there are use cases that we have regarding kind of, shall we call them dark nets, where certain nodes we do not wish to have public, and other nodes we do want to have the capability to make public. And so we've got a view that we could essentially have a federated model whereby there isn't one single network map operator, and there isn't one single network, and there is the capability to judiciously share notary information and specific node information between network maps, and for other network maps to be able to, again, judiciously accept them as well.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so there's quite a lot in there, Fuzz. So the first thing about the whitelist stuff, I mean, I don't want that to be there too either. That was a result of not a shortcut exactly, but expedited.
Go on, Mike.
launch.
Say it. Blame me for forcing you to.
No. You know, so we have a plan to enable that to be got rid of, and it's you're right, it's a pain, and we agree, and there's no debate about that. Some of the other things you bring up, that's almost more like a general design review, or more like design work on enhanced compatibility notions, for example, like enhanced notions of half compatibility or half not. And I mean, that's really interesting. We should probably take that to Corda Dev or the TAC list, because it's a bit out of scope. And today's session is really more about business networks, which is this like layer on top where you can add your own notion of an ACL. You can restrict who can take part in your business network. So just because you're in the same zone as another group of companies doesn't mean that your software will automatically trade with them if they send you the right messages, right? There's going to be, and that's what Ivan's work is about, enabling you to say, well, a subset of these nodes is, our group that we've all signed contracts with, for example, and that's where we'll trade. So let's take, some of the more advanced design about like half visible nodes or invisible nodes and things to attack list, perhaps, and then we'll continue with this presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Before we do that, can I double check that I understood it correctly? So it says here the nodes have a single well-defined identity and are discoverable. Am I correct in understanding that that means that the compatibility zone must agree on who the network map is, or where we find the network map, whatever that precisely is, and who the doorman is?
Yeah, so it's like kind of like compatibility zone defines like a group of services plus the technical parameters which everyone is agreed on.
So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes, the answer is yes to both.
Yeah. So we do this because the alternative is something like a Bitcoin or Ethereum style, where there's like random gossiping of who's where, and it's those sorts of designs are very vulnerable to civil attacks, amongst other things. So we have a more conventional notion of like the directory of the network members and things like that. So we can defend the network against civil attacks. That's basically what this infrastructure is about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand. I was just wanting to double check because it doesn't say explicitly what that identity means, and it means you must agree on the doorman, right?
Yeah, identity means X509 certificate signed by a trust root, and the doorman happens to be a way to get such a certificate. Yeah.
So, Mike, did I hear you saying that at some point you'll be able to hide some nodes from the network? So if you don't want to publish your resolution in the network map, you'll be able to hide that from participants?
I did not say that. I said we can discuss these sorts of things on the TAC list, because that's we were looking at, some people raise this as a question, can we have this feature, and we are looking at that. But I didn't mention such a feature today.
Okay, thanks.
But there, just to be clear, there is a temporary stopgap feature that will be announced when we ship. I think either Corda Enterprise or shortly afterwards, which I guess JC you already know about for a specific reason.
Yes.
Okay, right. So let's then talk about what is the business network. So we've discussed that the compatibility zone is some set of technical parameters which everyone agrees with, but it doesn't define the way the nodes transacting with each other. So we envision that within the single compatibility zone, there will be multiple businesses, and each of them will be like trading their own type of assets. And each of the businesses, they would have different operational requirements, different government requirements, different uptime requirements, and etc. So while the compatibility zone define the technical standards for the nodes to be able to talk to each other, the business networks define how the nodes transacting with each other. So what type of assets they can trade with each other, what are the rules around that, what are the operational aspects of the network, how are memberships managed, and etc. And a single compatibility zone, just to reiterate this, it will be able to contain multiple business networks. So like multiple business networks operating within the same global environment, but this means if we would like to transact some asset for some specific purpose, you would have to join some business network which this asset is transacted in. Any questions about that? Okay, then next slide, please. So this picture just illustrates the layout of the business networks versus compatibility zone as we see it. So as you see at the bottom of the picture, at the bottom of the slide, it shows multiple business networks. Each is built for its own purpose. For example, the blue one is to do some operations with cash. So the green one with insurance, with lending, with KYC, trade and finance, and etc. And there could be a lot of those. So as you see, some of the nodes, they participate in multiple business networks. So this means a single node is not limited to just a single business network. Each node can participate in multiple business networks, and also in the future do like cross-business network operations and etc. So these rules, how the node actually joins the network, what is required, is defined by the business networks. So from the top of the slide, you see a set of services which Mike and Richard briefly mentioned before, is the services which belong to the compatibility zone. So the first thing is obviously network maps for the peer discovery, the identity service, which so the domain which acts as certificate authority, the notary as consensus engine. As you see, the notary is with a star. So the notary can be run as on the compatibility zone level as well on the business network level. And so we will talk about this further maybe later on. And also compatibility zone can contain some third-party service providers, which are known as oracles. Does it all make sense? Any questions around that?
I'm sorry, I don't want to hijack the presentation. I don't understand the difference between compatibility zone and business network. To me, it sounds like the same thing. Do I get it wrong?
So, for example, imagine that, on this slide, imagine that you have a network, one for lending, and so some transactions which needed to happen for lending, and some transactions which for the insurance. For example, the requirements to join the insurance network to transact inside insurance network would be completely different from the requirement to the party to transact inside the lending network. So they, for example, let's say KYC process they would have to go through to be able to transact these assets would be completely different. Does it make sense? So that's why the actual governance around the business networks is done separated from the compatibility zone, because the requirements for the governance for the operations of each business are hugely vary from the case to case. While so compatibility zones just define the environment where you can potentially establish connection with any node, while the business networks, it defines what is actually required from a participant to be able to transact on your asset. Does it make sense?
So just to clarify, hi, it's Fuzz again. Just to clarify then, something like a business network may be, say, for example, the mortgages business in the UK, as an example, which involves a number of different actors. You've got banks, you've got obviously, you know, conveyancing services and so on, all interacting with together to run the entire network of transactions for preparing a mortgage and for transferring assets of the ownership of homes, if you like, from one person to another. Whereas that's quite a different network to, say, another network that's running, I don't know, say commodities trading, for example. The two are completely independent to some degree. And some nodes may belong to both networks.
And that's absolutely the key point for us, yes. So just to hammer home that point, I find it's much easier to think about this if you imagine an extreme end state where there's just one global Corda network. So we've sorted out the governance. There's no issues with control. It's openly and transparently governed for the use of the members. So the network services, you know, operate as the way you would hope they do. So one global Corda network, one global compatibility zone. Let's imagine there are millions of nodes within there. Every legal entity in the world has a certificate. Some subset of them may sign up with, JC asked the question, may sign up with Finastra for Lendercom. That subset who have a business relationship with Finastra, are running the Lendercom app and are transacting with each other and subject to the terms and conditions of that offering. That defines a business network. They got their certificates from the global network operator. They know the nodes are configured to be compatible with all others from the perspective of network parameters. But because they're running that app, they're part of that business network and subject to its business terms. And exactly as you say, some of those same banks may also be part of a mortgage lending business network running another app on the node that is, or in their node infrastructure that supports that with a different relationship with the network operator. But the key point is those different applications that are run by different subsets of nodes in different combinations all operate within the framework of this single global compatibility zone. That means you can have these multiple interoperating apps on the same global network. You know, that's what we're trying to achieve here by having this distinction between the minimal set of technical compatibility standards and then within that subsets of nodes that transact with each other for specific business purposes using specific apps provided by specific providers.
So if I get it correctly, the business network is a subset of the compatibility zone. So the pre-requirement is that all these nodes exist within the same compatibility zone, and then based on what core apps they are running, they would be compatible or not, and that would constitute a business network within the compatibility zone.
Yes, so all the nodes, they would have to run within the same compatibility zone. But as you fairly mentioned, that one of the things to be able to transact with each other, one of the common thing that they would have to share is the Corda, for example. The Corda to transact some specific type of the asset. But as well as the Corda, they have to follow some other set of rules to be able to basically which is defined by the business network.
You're really just trying to come up with a way to cleanly separate the business requirements of a specific network from the technical requirements, right? I mean, that's really what this is all about.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
So for people who have written a Corda, the easiest way to think of it is the business network is a list of parties, and you check at the start of your flows, is my counterparty in this list? And if not, you throw an exception, and it doesn't go any further. It's like basically that's the most min viable implementation of the concept.
Oh, you just described the architecture of the business network membership service.
Really, Ivan? Let's move on and have a look at the slide.
There's one question I have on the slide.
It'll be clearer it'll make the thing real.
No. The one question I have on this slide, which I didn't understand, was that notaries can be run inside compatibility zones as well as inside business networks. I don't understand what that really means.
Yeah, this means basically touches the trust issue. So as you know, one of the parameters in the compatibility zone is the list of the trusted notaries on the network. This means if you see the states which are notarized by trusted notary, then you basically trust these states to be not double spent. So you might want to run the notary inside your business network only, which will not be even whitelisted on the compatibility zone level, which would be used just for your local business networks, just for the transaction inside your business network, which basically you could do. But basically, you don't have to.
This is really useful. So
hang on, that's not quite right. Can we table that and come back to the group afterwards? I think that may not actually be quite correct. I think the notary would need to be whitelisted, but I don't want to take us down a sidetrack until we've just made sure we're completely aligned on that.
Isn't this putting a tremendous load on the notary, though? Because, I mean, in the current state of things, and we're using a DP2 or 3, we only have one notary defined for the entire compatibility zone. Wouldn't all these business networks end up reaching out to the same notary?
I think the point that we were trying to get to is that the notary does not have to be run by a single central authority. There has to be a shared sense of trust between the notaries, and therefore you could actually stand up a notary for a specific purpose, but it has to still be whitelisted at the compatibility zone level, because otherwise you can't actually transact things from one notary to another. Notary change wouldn't work. So yes, for SLA reasons, you might want to have a notary that is able to, or is primarily used for one particular type of asset. But that doesn't get away from the fact that you still actually want to maintain that compatibility.
The way I think it's useful to think about this is a question of Corda architecture rather than this presentation in general, is that when you think about notaries, there are two distinct times when you need to there are two distinct times when you care about them. There's the time at which you notarize a transaction, so you're actually involved in the notarization of a transaction. And as Ivan says, it may well be that for any given application, you have a preferred notary to use. Maybe all the users of the application are in London, and you prefer to use one of the whitelisted notaries that is fast and based in London, and it may even be operated by some of the people in that business network. So you can have an affinity, you can have a preference with one or two minor details. But there's then the question of compatibility, which is 3 years later, you may receive a transaction that when you resolve turns out to have something in its history that was notarized by some other notary. And given that we're trying to define a set of compatible nodes, everybody who conceivably receives such a transaction either has to all agree that that notary was valid or it was invalid. So there's the exercising of preference as to which notary you use to notarize a transaction, and then there's as part of being a member of the club and being a member of the compatibility zone, there's the list of notaries that you're willing to accept as valid if you happen to see a transaction that they've notarized historically. That's the distinction that I think is important to understand.
Would you mind redesigning this slide by representing something that's close to reality in terms of what you have today? I mean, a couple of compatibility zones and a couple of business networks, and how do you see them interacting today?
So to be able, for the business network to be able to interact with each other, they would have to be within the same compatibility zone. So as Mike mentioned, the different compatibility zones, they cannot interact with each other because they're not necessarily compliant with the technical standards of each other. So
is it pragmatic? Is it pragmatic? Is it what's happening today? Do you see several compatibility zones, or do you see one global compatibility zone with multiple business networks?
we would like to encourage people to join the one global compatibility zone. But basically, we see some businesses, some people would like to run their own compatibility zones as well. But basically,
but then your network map cache becomes a yellow pages of everyone that's interested in Corda.
Sorry, could you repeat this again, please?
The network map cache becomes a yellow pages of everybody using Corda.
But I think you'd want that, right? Because if you want to figure out which business network to join, let's say I'm a company that's I've written a Corda app and I want to decide, do I want to join an existing business network or do I want to start my own? It would be great to have a listing or a directory service available that says these are the existing business networks would you like to join or would you like to apply to join one?
Well, that would work within a business network, but across business networks, I doubt you want to advertise your position. If you're an insurance guy, why would you want everybody in the KYC business or everybody in the lending business to know about you?
Well, because those are your reinsurance partners or those are your brokers. I mean, it's certainly community driven, right?
They would.
This is the point I was thinking about when I was talking about documents.
If you participate in multiple transactions, in multiple business networks, so for example, if you're an insurance guy and you participate in the lending business network as well, this doesn't mean that they know that you are an insurance guy. They just know that basically they know you as the lending network participant, and the insurance business network knows you as the insurance network participant. So you don't share like your status of participation in other business networks with everyone. It's managed on the different level from the network map, if that's the question.
Yeah, guys. So I think you know, we're spending quite a lot of time on these issues of the design of compatibility zones, and that's fine. And I suggest what we might want to do is reschedule the business networks for some other time and go completely deep into this notion of compatibility. You know, in interacting applications in a single zone today, because that seems to be what most people want to talk about. So you know, we have a session. We could use it for that if you like.
Mike, not necessarily. I mean, happy to kind of put the network map compatibility zone issues, if you like, to one side to make sure that we fully understand the business network proposal. It's, you know, the question that, for example, that I raised was really about understanding what did that statement make. Notaries can run inside a compat zone as well as a business network. I'd rather stick to the kind of the scope of the presentation, because there's quite a lot of effort been put into it, and we understand it properly. If anyone else objects, please feel free to say so.
Yeah, so the presentation is about a Corda app, which we've been developing, which is a way of synchronizing. It uses the Corda ledger to synchronize notions of membership of business networks.
Yeah.
Which is quite nice. You know, we use our own technology to synchronize lists. You wouldn't have to implement the concept this way. There's a sort of the conceptual side of a business network. You know, why would you want one? What does it do? How is it different to a compatibility zone? And then there's what the bulk of this presentation is actually about, which is a sort of technical implementation of how do I learn who's in my business network? How do I integrate that with my app? And it sounds like, you know, we could plow on and go into the details like that, but we could do more conceptual stuff as well.
Why don't we, Buzz, if that's what you want to do, and given that's how we structured the session, why don't we do that? It would mean that we have to page turn through the slides because others simply won't get through them. And we'll organize a separate session to talk about the compatibility zone and you know, some of the I guess the thinking processes, thoughts behind that. But if we keep asking questions that are more about the sort of underlying, then we're not going to get to review this particular application.
But I think those questions, so I agree with that. I think we press on, but these questions have been extraordinarily valuable because what it's shown to me, given the caliber and the experience of the people on the call who are asking them, is that we've not yet done a good enough job of really articulating the considerable work we've done internally to define what it means for things to be compatible over a period of years or even decades in the face of an evolving network. We've not done enough to bring people along the journey, and we could have got some of it wrong, but we should do a separate write-up and a separate session to debate that, and hopefully all become a lot clearer. So I think these questions have been really useful because it's highlighted that gap.
Okay.
Yeah.
That gets my vote as well. Okay.
Right. So thanks, Richard. So and One more concept which I'd like to introduce before we start with the application design is the concept of the business network operator node. So as similar to the compatibility zone, when we have like a number of services which, so for example, network map for the PA discovery, identity service for the certificate authority, and etc. On the in the business network, we have a concept of the business network operator node. So business network operator is entitled to perform such administrative tasks as memberships management, like membership lead distribution, customer onboarding. For example, he could distribute the Corda update. He could provide some signal functionality about important events on the network, and etc. So business network operator is so we envisage it as a separate Corda identity, and which is run by the business network operator. So business network operator is not involved in any transactions, but it's rather doing such administrative tasks which I just mentioned about. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now let's start.
Sorry, I've got a question about the DNOs, if I may. In the use case around mortgages that we were just talking about earlier, who would be the BNO? What's the natural fit there for the BNO? And it's a kind of a leading question because in a number of our kind of joint venture, mutual type core apps that we've been looking at, there isn't one single natural fit for the BNO. It's actually multiple parties in theory. That the BNO is effectively a role, and the role can be assigned to multiple nodes because, well, frankly, some nodes may join, others may leave. Some nodes maybe we don't wish them to be an operator, but later on we do want them to be an operator. And so I'm just wondering if the idea of a single node being the BNO, if that's a wise idea, if that's a good design decision.
It's the BNO is just a role though. So it doesn't necessarily mean that one entity or even a group of entities needs to be relied upon to persist for that role for the life of the business network. For the mortgage example, you could envision like the top mortgage origination companies creating an independent entity that's funded through some type of commercial model for the business network, whose sole goal is to upkeep and perform the administrative tasks of the BNO. Or you could imagine a mortgage business network that's one mortgage origination provider and his group of clients and anyone else that wants to join, and that mortgage company is a single entity. You could also make it even more distributed. You could create some type of self-sustaining foundation or organization. So I think you have a whole range of spectrums. The business network operator, as you said, is just a role. But you can take it all the way from single entity to very distributed to
that last point, I think maybe what's missing is a categorization of type of business network. Because if you said it was fully distributed, then maybe, like for instance, maybe there's a template that says categorize your business network based on that type. Here are the roles that need to be filled out. Because I think what's happening here is the assumption is that all networks are going to have a governor and an operator and be somewhat reliant on the centralization function. But I think it's going to, in actuality, you're going to have a span of different types of consortiums that form. And I think you want to have the consortium have the flexibility to categorize their network. And then that categorization should set a template for the types of roles that are required in that consortium.
So this is actually a really good point. Maybe there's a way to move past this, which is actually just to observe, and this is deliberate, who's presenting this, and this is Ivan from our services team rather than one of the core platform engineers, and that's deliberate because as we get into the design, what we'll see is the concepts we're outlining are actually application level concepts. They're entirely within the domain of the implementer. They're not platform concepts. So everything that's just been described, absolutely, one could imagine a business network that's entirely opt-in without an operator. You happen to download a particular app. Maybe it's an app for people whose X500 names begin with the letter A, and all those people can talk to each other using that app, and anyone else can't. So you can imagine one where there is no central entity at all. I think but we see many people either live or about to go live where there is some entity, often a for-profit entity, who is making a business bet that there's value to be given to clients by deploying deploying an application that allows them to transact in some way. And what I think what Ivan, you're about to present is, in a case where you do have an identifiable actor who's pulling everyone together, there's often a need for the nodes to be able to get information from that entity, who's on the network, who's paid their dues, what roles the different people in. And in that case, here's a pattern you can use to implement it. But we're not saying this is the only way. All the patterns have just been described. I suspect all of them will emerge. Is that fair, Ivan?
Yeah, that's exactly. But yeah, that's right.
So I misunderstood something from the original post on Corda Dev then, because it looked like some aspects of the business network validation and checking for staleness was being pushed down into the notary and quite deep down into the notary for it to occur. So if there's no changes to the core and this is simply an app level decision, then that's fine. It's only if it's going down further deeper, then our concern, in fact, generally was that the model around a single BNO is probably a specialization of a more general concept of there being N BNOs, and for any kind of decision to be made, there's M of N voting going on. And in the more kind of specialized case where there's only one operator, then that's obvious because there's only one operator and they effectively self-vote. Yeah. But if it's not something that's deep, that's not affecting the core, then that's perhaps fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thinking here is that,
fine. I love your wording there. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that the thought process is very much that there'll be different sorts of governance structures and different sorts of operational structures for different types of business network. And so this is something where we're trying to come up with an approach that works for certain types of networks and say, here's a prototypical example of how you could do this for one class of business network, but there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution here. Some models of business networks will be very, very different to others. So what we've tried to identify is some roles that we think are going to be fairly common, but actually the way that those roles are fulfilled will actually be different from network, business network to business network.
Okay, let's
thanks, Dave. So let's talk about the business network membership service then. So the proposal is to implement the business network membership service at the Corda level. So out of the following reasons. So the first thing is the requirements, as you fairly mentioned, requirements for each business network might massively vary from the case to case. And the business networks, they should be able to tweak the implementation of the membership service to fit their particular needs, what they can do at the Corda level. So business network membership service might have a completely separate life cycle from the main platform. And again, it should be the actual people who are running the network should be able to tweak the implementation to fulfill their own needs. So the ease of the installation integration of this application into the existing enterprise infrastructures. This means once someone installs Corda node, it's really easy to install new applications onto it without having to certify any other technologies. For example, if you were to choose to serve the memberships via some HTTP web server or something. And also the proposed architecture of the membership service maps very well into the future support of reference state and data distribution groups. So I will talk about this a bit later. Does it make sense so far? Questions? Okay, so proposal is to issue all the memberships, have all the memberships issued onto the ledger as Corda states. So each membership would virtually consist of two parts. So the first part is the membership information. It contains some generic fields such as issue date, modified date, the membership status, and etc. And the membership information can be unilaterally managed by the BNO. So the idea is that the BNO should be able to unilaterally revoke someone's membership or to approve someone's membership in the case if that's required, without getting the explicit signature of the member. And the other part is the member metadata. Member metadata is the way for the member to associate some metadata with his identity. So for example, this can be his node type, for example, the role he's playing on the business network, or this could be some metadata about his address or his contact details, and etc. Some custom metadata which is managed by the member itself. Yeah, please, next slide.
Just question from me, Ivan. So the way that this is packaged, first of all, it's proposed, as Richard said, as one possible option for solving the business network challenge of membership. Yeah. Secondly, it's packaged as a Corda application. So presumably, it's designed in a way that the metadata content would be extensible or adaptable by.
Yes, exactly. And this is on one of the last slides listed as the API extension point. So basically, every business network will be able to tweak the fields for their particular needs, so they're not enforced. Next, let's go briefly through the flows which are going to be supported by the membership service. So the first thing is obviously the member onboarding, and it virtually consists of 3 different stages. So the first part, 3 different phases. So the first phase is the request, when someone submits the request to get on board into the business network. And when someone submits the request, it would issue the he would contact the BNO via the Corda flows, and it would issue the a membership state in pending status onto the ledger. So second phase is the internal checks. So that's another API extension point which can be used by the BNO. So BNO can integrate the application with their internal systems, for example, to integrate with some KYC system, or to integrate with some internal systems to do the checks they require to monitor the potential member gains. So after all the checks has been done, the BNO can unilaterally approve the membership and move it to the approved status. And that's the point where the member can start transacting the network. Yeah, next slide, please.
Hold on. So you're saying that when we're onboarding a new participants, we need first to onboard onto the CZ and then to onboard on the business network. So we have 2 processes.
Yeah, and they're managed by different people. So to get on board onto CZ, this means that you would be able to potentially transact on the network. You would be technically compatible with other Corda nodes. But onboarding onto every business network, the process of onboarding would vary from the network to network, because every network has different requirements for the monitoring their people, for monitoring their members, for the KYC and etc.
But I think there may be a case for optimization of this. So while it's conceptually still a 2-phase process of assigning an identity for the overall network and then onboarding to a particular business network and meeting KYC requirements for a particular business network, there may well be a case where, if there are a large number of participants who wish to come onto the overall network in order to take part in a business application, that the 2-stage process can be optimized effectively to be a single stage.
My primary concern with this is that still puts you guys in the driver's seat, because if you run the CZ, you have the yay or nay on who can join.
Oh,
and
totally.
To me,
yeah, actually, James is on the hook to. Actually, now you're on the call, James. Why didn't you front run it? Yeah, there is a lot of work going on to get us to a position where we don't have that power. But go on, James.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm doing, JC, is working on a governance model for the compatibility zone. For the compatibility zone we call the Corda network, and the intent is to have completely open governance and a fairly unrestrictive overall identity assignment criteria, a set of criterion, so that effectively it is the business networks that are in control of the membership of a particular application, and they can assume by and large that that anyone that they wish to be a participant in their business network can also become a participant in the overall network. So yeah, we intend to take a liberal approach for the overall business network, for the overall network.
That feels like the right approach. Like, I think if you can put more specifications around that and share that out, that feels like something really worth diving into.
Yeah. Sorry, who was that comment from?
Gloros at Microsoft.
Thank you. We will share it shortly.
Yeah. It's probably also worth saying,
I was going to say, in fact, I will drop off this call in a few minutes because it's our board meeting at the moment, and I'll be presenting the proposed approach for opening up the governance of the network to them in a few minutes. So very close to sharing our thinking. It's not blocked, and we want your feedback, but we're not ignoring this. There's a lot of work going on.
It's got quite detailed. I have to say, our business model is to sell sort of software and consulting and services and so on, and to some extent the sort of needing some infrastructure to connect these nodes together is painful, at least all these discussions about power sharing agreements and so on. If I knew a way to get rid of these things, then I would do it. But yeah, if you look at some of the alternatives, then they open up different cans of worms. Like there can be no permissioning at all, but then part of the original design brief for whole like private blockchain efforts was we want there to be some notion of permission and permissioning, and then we could have no compatibility. But then a big part of the value of blockchain technology again is sort of you can send cash in the same transaction as updating a loan, as updating a regulatory reports kind of thing. So we don't want to lose that either. I think over time as technology gets better and computer science gets better, more and more of this stuff will be decentralized, and we won't care. We'll more than that, we'll be investing in it, right? Because it's just simpler to solve this stuff with technology, and it's more convincing to people.
I really respect that, Mike. Obviously, I know that you've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I guess I think we probably would appreciate spending a bit of time to understand the use cases that you examined, and for us to really kind of fully come up to, to speed with the design that's gone into and the thinking that's gone into the design. There's just, I hope it's not fait accompli, if you like, and that we still can kind of are still open to understanding, and then also maybe considering other options as well, even if those options have been already considered by yourself, at least for us to understand why they wouldn't work.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We should organize another session like this to discuss these things.
Well, I was going to suggest, at least 2 more sessions. So one would be to explain in more detail and on questions, I guess, on the thinking of this sort of so-called compatibility zone, which is a name I hate, versus the business network concept. But also, and then a separate one to talk through, the straw man, and I'm going to call it a straw man for now, open governance model for the Corda network. But as a clue, it's been modeled on ICANN. So it really is intended to be open.
Yeah, and what I also want to suggest is maybe we should reschedule this call, and because it's just 5 minutes left and no way we can get through the end of the material and then discuss the design in the remaining 5 minutes. So, and then what we can do is reschedule this call, and for example, we are working on other business network related services as well, and then for example, to go through the multiple business network related services in one go without discussing what business networks and compatibility zone is.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. So what should we
that sounds great. Yeah, it'd be great to have a deep dive on the business network.
Yeah. So should we go into some of the thinking in the last 5 minutes of some of the zones and stuff? Yeah, so gosh, where to start? So when you're designing software, right, there's always things on which reasonable people can disagree, and you can hard code them where you can make them configurable. And some bits of Corda's design are hard coded, and other parts are configurable. Everything that's configurable is gets dumped in this bucket that we call the compatibility zone. And why might people disagree? A classic one is how quickly should you upgrade, right? Because in a consensus system, everyone needs to run the same software, so there needs to be some agreement about, do you go very slow and have very long upgrade cycles, or do you, crack the whip and everyone has to upgrade every 6 months, because that's the minimum amount of time you have to wait before new features start. Yeah, reasonable people can disagree. We probably shouldn't pick a number and hard code it. Therefore, then you get into who does decide, and you get into governance and committees, and should there be separate organizations and things, and that's what's taken us down this route. Now, the one that there are a couple of things where people Yeah, I haven't seen much argument about most of the things we call network parameters. So, min, max, message sizes, event horizon times, and all this stuff. It's documented in the documentation website, or at least in the master version of it, what these parameters are. The ones that people bring up, and of course, because they're the most controversial, are which notaries are there and who are they and who takes part, and the identity mechanisms. So that's where all the time gets spent. And the reason we have a single identity route and so on is it's partly simplicity. It's also partly because the existing PKI companies, they are basically under the thumb of web browser makers who set policies for all CAs based on, basically the policies are set based on what a handful of Google engineers feel is best for the web. So their policies around certificate expiry for EV certificates, for example, are chosen, on the basis of what Google happens to think makes sense for evolving web SSL stuff. And that may or may not be right for the Corda business community. If a zone has a separate trust root, it's technically very clear, like who signs what. So who signs the network parameters, who signs the network map information that helps people locate each other. That's all. It simplifies the design significantly. And in theory, I suppose, we could explore a design where there are multiple trust roots, but that would open up a whole set of cans of worms. Like if you found two conflicting network map files that had like different stuff in them signed by different entities, which one do you use? Now so we've got this very clear black and white notion of compatibility, right? It's quite small. There isn't that much in the definition of a compatibility zone, but it's either in or out, and you're in or out. Now, the way maybe we should go longer term is to blur the lines and say, well, and we get a lot of questions like, okay, I kind of get the reasoning for this design, but I don't know, it's still feels a bit dodgy. And this is partly our problem because we haven't organized some of the network stuff early enough. Basically, we haven't sent out enough detail quickly enough. So it's understandable that people have these questions. And very often the answer is, can I be half in and half out? Which maybe, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say to that question normally because we haven't spent enough time thinking through all the edge cases that would create and the impact on the code base and maintainability and security of the protocol. There's many things to consider. But it may be that that's the direction we go in future if we can't win the argument with like, here's our governance proposal and look, it's pretty harmless and we're not going to, we either can't or, won't restrict people or entities from coming on board and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of ways we can go here. And what I'm hoping is the governance proposal will be so great and people will say, this resolves all my concerns that we don't have to implement loads of new stuff in the code. That's on the engineering side, that's what I'm hoping, and we'll see if that's how it plays out.
And I know we're at the top of the hour, but I just saw one comment, which may be the one you were addressing, Mike, from JC, and I think Michael from Microsoft. Why can't we just have one CN, one CZ equals one BN? Wouldn't life be easier? And so that tells me there's a previous argument we need to make, and we need to make on the next call. There's an underlying assumption behind all of this that the users of the networks, not necessarily those who bring products to market straight away, although I think there's benefits for them as well, but the users of the network will get most value when node infrastructures they deploy can be used to participate in multiple different applications. In other words, you have a model whereby there's as to the greatest extent possible, the smallest number of independent networks that multiple different applications can run within and interoperate within. And therefore, necessarily, if a compatibility zone is the definition of a compatible network, then one compatibility zone with multiple business networks is what we think the vision is, as opposed to non-interoperable standalone networks, one deployed per application. However, if participants want to deploy a standalone application that talks to their peers for that one purpose and that purpose only, then of course that's absolutely fine. If they don't have this desire for interoperability between applications, then they don't have to use any of this. They can just go standard their own private network. The unstated assumption at the start of all of this is that people do want nodes to be able to participate in multiple different applications of business networks, and this is how we think it could be achieved. But for participants who don't have that requirement, this complexity goes away, but we strongly believe they do or will have that requirement, and hence why we're trying so hard to nail the definitions.
I think one way I describe the the Corda network is to try and think of it as the internet of Corda nodes. And you could say, well, for our application, we don't need to be connected to the internet, as it were. And that's true. But if you are connected to the internet, you get infinitely more flexibility as a participant, as a node operator, and your IT estate is considerably simplified, and your ability to use data, including reusing digitized assets across different applications, is improved. And those are really the drivers for it. But anyway, let's organize a separate session to go into that.
Okay, so just to summarize then, I think we currently have 3 potential sessions organized, one which is a deep dive into compatibility zones and business networks, one which is the governance model, and the third one which is the business network membership services and associated services that Ivan's currently working on.
Yeah.
We'll get in the diary fairly soon and continue the conversation. Any last comments from anybody? If not, we'll close the call and I'll get those meetings rearranged.
Thanks all.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Mark, before you shut it, can you make sure you capture the chat? There's a ton of really good discussion in the chat. Let's make sure we capture it and circulate it. Thanks everyone.
Will do.
Thank you.